Welcome back, class. So in this class, we're going to talk about Thomas Aquinas and his 5 arguments for the existence of God. Thomas Aquinas was a Christian philosopher. He lived from 1225 AD to 1274 AD. And I'll be honest, this might not be the most exciting class you take here at the college, but I think by the end of this lecture, you're going to be glad that you took it. It's actually really interesting to hear these 5 arguments, and the reason why I've included this in this class is because I think it's pertinent. I think you need to at least know of these 5 arguments because they will come about in your conversations, especially if you're talking to someone who has gone off to university and taken philosophy. And so I want to talk about these 5 arguments that Thomas Aquinas talked about. We'll take them one at a time, and these will be on your midterm, but more importantly, I want you just to be aware of them and know them. So we're going to take most of our time with the first one and the last one. The 3 in the middle are kind of connected to the first one, but the first one is the argument of motion. The second one is the argument from causation. The third one is the argument from contingency. The fourth one is the argument from degrees, and the fifth one is the teleological argument, or as it's better known today, intelligent design. So these 5 are somewhat interlocked with each other. So let's start off with the argument from motion or change. Motion or change. The change of something from potential reality to actual reality. So I actually got a lot of help from a Christian philosopher today named Robert Barron, who's quite well known in the apologetics world. But Robert Barron really is helpful when it comes to understanding this idea of everything that has a potential reality and an actual reality. So it could be something or it could not be something. The one causing the change must be in possession of the thing it's causing to move. Okay, so I'm going to explain this because I know right now you're probably just like, what are you talking about? Okay, I'm going to try to break it down and give you an analogy or an example that I think will help you understand it. All right. I was a missionary in Thailand for 5 years. When I went to Thailand, I learned the Thai language. Pom bin kru ti pratet Thai ประมาณ 5 ปี เดี๋ยวนี้ ผมไปอยู่ในประเทศอเมริกา เป็นครูที่นี้ประมาณ 3 ปี. Okay, I'm done. I learned Thai in Thailand. And as I was learning Thai, I had the potential to know the Thai language. But I needed someone who already possessed the Thai language to teach it to me. While in the process of change, there is potential for the thing changing to change or not to change. While I was learning the Thai language, I had the potential of learning it or not learning it. The thing changing must be moved by an act of that which is not being moved. In the case of language, the teacher is not learning and teaching at the same time. So no one can be the mover and the moved at the same time in the same sense. You can't teach yourself Thai. Now, you can pick up a book and learn it yourself, but it is the one who wrote the book that's moving you. So this idea of change or the argument from motion is something is moving, something had to have moved it, and while the thing that moved it may also be moving, there had to be a point where the first thing that moved the second thing had to be unmovable. All right. There you have it. It's complex. You might even find it uninteresting. But the reality is Thomas Aquinas thought that this logic proved the existence of God. And I happen to agree with him. In summary, things move. Nothing moves itself. There can be no infinite regress of moved movers. Hence, there must be some first unmoved mover. That unmoved mover is God. Now, atheists today will often agree with this argument up until the last line, which says the unmoved mover is God. There are atheists that would admit that, yes, this makes logical sense, but who's to say that that unmoved mover is the God, the Christian God? They will say that matter or energy is the unmoved mover. But scientifically, a mind has to be behind the matter and energy. Matter cannot create matter. A rock cannot move another rock. There has to be a mind behind matter. Okay, so the Christian apologist would say, and Thomas Aquinas would have said, that the first mover had to be unmoved, and the first mover had to be a mind. It had to have a mind. The claim of the Apostle Paul, as we find it in Acts chapter 17, is the most probable to any theory that any atheist has proposed. This is what the Apostle Paul said in Acts chapter 8 and Acts chapter 17. So, Paul, standing before the council, addressed them as follows. Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, to an unknown tongue. This God, whom you worship without knowing, is the one I'm telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. From one man, he created all the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand when they should rise and fall, and he determined their boundaries. His purpose was for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and exist. And some of your own poets have said, quote, we are his offspring, end quote. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen from gold or silver or stone. God overlooked people's ignorance about these things in earlier times, but now he commands everyone, everywhere, to repent of their sins and turn to him. For he has set a day for judging the world with justice by the man he has appointed, and he proved to everyone who this is by raising him from the dead. When they heard Paul speak about the resurrection of the dead, some laughed in contempt, but others said, we want to hear more about this later. Or listen to the Apostle Paul as he wrote to the church in Colossae. Paul said this, for he, God the Father, has rescued us from the kingdom of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his dear Son, who purchased our freedom and forgave our sins. Christ is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. For through him, God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, and authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him. He existed before anything else, and he holds all creation together. Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is first in everything. For God in all his fullness was pleased to live in Christ. And through him, God reconciled everything to himself. He made peace with everything in heaven and on earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. This includes you who were once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions. But now he has brought you into his own presence, and you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault. Now, in the second half of this class, we will talk more about Christianity. In this portion, we just want to talk about the existence of God. But I think the Christian argument is by far the most logical in regards to Yahweh being the unmovable mover. So, I read to you two passages from the Apostle Paul. And what I want to say to you is, I believe strongly that this unmovable mover is Yahweh, the creator of all things. And I believe it is improbable that any other God is the unmovable mover. I believe it's improbable that any matter or thing is the unmovable mover. So, the first argument was the argument of motion. The second argument is the argument from causation. And 2, 3, and 4 we'll go through really quickly here. Number 2, the cosmological argument, as it's known today, the argument from causation. So number 1, the cosmos, or the universe, exists. Number 2, the cosmos could not have caused itself. Number 3, therefore, there exists something powerful enough to cause the universe. It's pretty simple. Let's take a deeper look at this argument. Nothing causes itself. It would have to be prior to itself, which is impossible. To take away the cause of something is to take away its effect. So if something doesn't have a cause, it is not. It had to have been caused. Number 3, everything has a cause, and you can't keep going to infinity with this. So everything has a cause, and you just can't keep going back and saying that has a cause, that has a cause, that has a cause. Number 4, there had to be a first cause by something which was not caused. Number 5, if there was no cause, there couldn't be other causes. If there was no first cause, there couldn't be other causes. Number 6, one must admit to a first cause which was not caused. Okay, so this is the argument from causation. So number 1, we talked about the argument from motion. Number 2, we talked about the argument from causation. Number 3, the argument from contingency. So this is the idea that something is either possible or something is necessary. If something is possible, it could be or could not be. If something is necessary, it has to be. Okay? Everything that we see comes into existence and then ceases to exist. All right, I want us to think about this, and let's use a fruit as an analogy. Okay, let's use an apple. All right, so there was a time when this apple was not. Now this apple is, and eventually this apple will rot and will cease to exist. Okay, so that's an apple. Everything that we see with our human eye was not, then it is, then it ceases to exist. According to Aquinas, everything has an uncertainty. All objects are possible objects with the capability and inevitable certainty of fading. So to go back and use the apple as an example, The apple that you or I eat today may not have been had the apple tree not gotten the right sunlight. But it did get the right sunlight, and so it is. But it will cease to exist. So an apple is a possible thing. So all objects are possible objects with the capability and inevitable certainty of fading. Okay, does that make sense? All right. With an infinite past, it would seem that all things would run their course and cease to exist. All things would. This is why Aquinas insisted that something must exist necessarily. Something that is neither generated nor corrupted. And Thomas Aquinas says this necessary thing is God. All right, number 4, the argument from degrees. So we had the argument from motion, we had the argument from causation, we had the argument from contingency, and number 4, the argument from degrees. All right, so this is the idea that there are different degrees of perfection. And when we talk about there's different degrees of perfection, we're talking about things. So we can rank things by that which is true or that which is real. We can rank things by that which is good. Example, we would rather be a cat than to be a stone because there is more that a cat can do. Okay, does that make sense? So in that sense, a cat is better than a stone because a cat can do more than the stone can do. We all would admit that humans have more actuality than other kinds of things. Humans have more potential than animals and plants and inanimate objects. When we look at the things that exist, we can rank them. And the lower life forms depend on the higher life forms. There has to be something at the top of the rankings. So Aquinas would say that proves the existence of God. God is whatever is at the top, and everything else depends upon the thing at the top. Okay, so that is Thomas Aquinas' argument from degrees. So we talked about the argument from motion. We talked about the argument from causation. We talked about the argument from contingency. We talked about the argument from degrees. And last but not least, the teleological, say that 5 times fast. The teleological argument, and it's better known today as intelligent design. And this goes against the idea of natural selection, or the better known term, evolution. Okay, so evolution is the idea that we are evolving. That is to say, we're getting better and better and better. So if you look at us today, we are humans walking around this earth. But if you were to rewind the clock 1,000,000 years ago, there would not have been humans. There may have been some life form, but it would not have looked like humans. It would have been maybe apes or monkeys would have been the greatest, most smartest life form. And if you keep going back millions more years, billion years, you would have had just plants. And before that, you would have had just rocks. And before that, you would have had nothing. So an atheist believes that if you keep going back before the Big Bang, there was absolutely nothing. And we are evolving and getting greater and greater. But intelligent design says that the universe is so complex that there had to be a brain behind it. It is so ordered, there needs to have been a purpose or goal. That is to say, it was designed with a goal. When you guys watch the debate between William Lane Craig and Christopher Hitchens, there's a moment early on in that debate where William Lane Craig goes off, and he's basically talking about the unlikelihood that all that is came about by chance. And it was such a powerful moment in that debate that he actually got an applause from the audience. But it is so unlikely that it's virtually impossible that evolution is true. Unintelligent matter needs an intelligent being to direct it. Nature is unintelligent. Okay? I'm going to use, for example, this baseball bat. My good friend made this for me, and it's a beautiful bat. And this wood came from a tree. Okay? It is matter. It's an object. Okay? This object could not possibly make another tree, another object. A tree cannot make another tree. There has to be something behind this object that was intelligent. And therefore, the Christian would say intelligent design has to begin with a creator, has to begin with someone that is intelligent, a brain. Now, before we end this class, I want to talk about William Paley. William Paley lived in the early 1800s, and he came up with what is known as today the watchmaker analogy, and I think it's brilliant. Paley takes a walk in nature. Okay, so here's the analogy. Paley takes a walk in nature. Okay, he's walking in the woods, and he comes across a rock on the ground. He picks it up and thinks, maybe this has been here for all of time. He puts the rock down and continues to walk. As he continues to walk, he finds a wristwatch. He picks up the wristwatch. He holds it to his ear, and it's ticking. Tick, 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 tick. He sees the detail painstakingly put into this device. And it seems to have a purpose. There was a purpose for which this device was created. Paley cannot conclude the same of the watch as he did of the rock. It could not have just been there. Paley continued to argue the universe is 1,000,000 times more complex than a watch. The universe had to be calculated by an intelligent designer. Now, Paley's watchmaker analogy for the last 200 years has been used all around the world to prove intelligent design. There are people who argue against it, atheists, and I'll share with you one of the most famous atheists and his argue against it now, but I don't feel like it holds up. I think it's, for lack of a better word, rubbish. It's garbage. But I'll give you an argument against Paley's watch analogy. One of the best arguments against it comes from a very famous atheist. He's a Scottish philosopher, and his name is David Hume. And David Hume said that this sort of thought, this watchmaker analogy, leads to an anthropomorphic concept of God. Now, I'll explain what David Hume means by that. And what he means by that is that we give God human qualities. So we view God as we would view a human being, but he's just like a greater human being. When in actuality, we have never seen God. Okay, so this is what David Hume would say. David Hume would say that a watch is complex, so a human designed it. The world is super complex, and so a superhuman designed it. He would say, well, that's a leap, because we actually can observe a watch being made because we've actually observed it, because we've seen other humans make it. But to then say that there was a superhuman who created the complex world, that's too far of a leap. We don't know that because we've never actually observed the universe being created. In the end, the atheist at best can say the Christian God is not God. But they have failed to disprove intelligent design. Any attempt to do so has been left to chance, literally. Some have argued that every intricate part of our universe came into being by chance. But Thomas Aquinas and many like him have left atheists reeling for logical arguments for years. Atheists have given way to new atheists and agnostics who can't disprove an intelligent maker, so they just say, we can't know. And those are the 5 arguments. 800 plus years later, we're still using them because they work. I personally don't think they are the greatest arguments to use when talking to an atheist. And we'll get into that more as the class goes on, as we talk about the moral law and as we talk about the problem of pain. What I want to say in wrapping up this lecture here is that most atheists are not atheists because of philosophy. When you listen to a Christian philosopher debate an atheistic philosopher, this is me, and I'm biased because I'm a Christian, but I feel like the Christian philosophers mop the floor with atheist philosophers. So I don't believe someone is an atheist because of philosophy. I believe that atheists are atheists because of the problem of pain. And we'll talk about that later in the class. But I wanted you to at least be aware of these arguments. This was a longer class than probably the others will be. But I wanted you to be aware of these 5 arguments, and I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you.